there's certain upgrades in this game that I basically always get. If they're available, I will always get health regeneration. That's the biggest one, actually. Anything that gives me health back, because it's such a freaking precious commodity. Not actually sure that I'm happy with this shotgun. Rather have the laser. Not usually an SMG guy, but I figure alongside the laser it's not that bad. So when it comes to talking about the enemy design in Doom, I'm sure I won't be able to avoid talking about it, but Mark Brown has already done such a great job of that. I feel like I got nothing to add. I mean, you know, screw that guy for taking all the good design commentary. No, but seriously, like, I presume that you've seen Mark Brown's video on the subject, and that dude is awesome. He's like the every frame of painting of video game design. I wish that I had resources like Mark Brown and extra credits when I was first starting out as a game developer. I feel like I would have understood a lot more. I got no ammo left. Same two upgrades as last time. Alright, well I'm gonna need to have a lack of accuracy with this submachine gun's gonna kill me. I really shouldn't have wasted so many laser shots. This thing might be okay with an accuracy mutation, but it is just abysmal without one. I guess this is, backup. Like if you just want to sort of spread a bunch of fire around while your primary weapon is, aha, something else. There we go. Now, ho ho ho, right? Ho ho ho. I did play a couple of Doom Classic maps on my own, and let's see here, higher ammo max, Corpse and Fly. I like Corpse and Fly. And it was, one thing that was interesting to me was just how, what am I trying to say? Just how different the standards have become. Like level length. Like people complain about how short games are nowadays, but I mean, Doom levels were really small. I'm not sure how we got to the idea that games, by their nature, are supposed to be a certain length. Because there was this people were complaining. I remember when I was new to being a game developer, people were complaining about how games weren't 20 hours anymore. That wasn't that long after some of the games I played as a kid that were way shorter than 20 hours. So I'm not sure where that standard came from. Haha. Wait, where's the last enemy? There he is. Oh, crap. I think I've said that I love that it's that in this game it's crossbow bolts and not bullets that shoot through multiple enemies. Which seems like it doesn't quite line up with reality. Where are these guys? Whoops. Oh crap! No, not you. I just got hit by a freaking ninja. This is gonna go badly for me. That's what I needed. I guess it is true that it's kind of a difference between me and Mark Brown, the fact that he's a critic and I'm a designer, but so we'd probably do have slightly different perspectives, but not slightly, that is a pretty significantly different perspective, but he's just really good at it, though. He kind of surprises me by, actually, that's one thing I like about, like, listening to some of the better, you know, game reviewers and critics out there, is that there's some of them that really do seem like they get it more than they should. Yeah, you kind of get used to the idea that a lot of game reviewers just don't really understand what goes into to making a game. They'll kind of, you know, have unrealistic expectations, sort of set people up for disappointment. But now and then, you know, you'll run into a critic or a journalist who really does actually understand. It'll actually help people, you know, get a more accurate view of how things are actually working. And Mark Brown strikes me as someone who's sort of in that camp. You know, he's honestly trying to understand his medium better, and as a result, he's, you know, making it better for other people. I can see that guy. Not great. He might be dead right now. Yeah. Let's try this again. Ow. Ow. I am not having a good time. Well, I mean, no. I actually am having a good time. I'm not having a successful time. One thing I like about this game is that I enjoy it even when I'm not being successful. I've never understood this working. Oops. Yeah, as a game developer, we sometimes we do have to think about cost and perception, right? Like if you're making a $15 game, people do have different expectations of you than if you're making a $60 game. But there's a sense that standard can kind of be unfair because you can measure the duration of an experience, but how does that map exactly to the value of an experience? Because like a game that is amazing, that isn't very long, I still feel like I should be willing to pay more money for it because it's just really good. And there's a sense that the cost of a game should map not to the complexity of creating it, and not even necessarily to the moment-to-moment pleasure that it provides the player, but rather simply to the amount of time that the player gets to abnegate, and and I just feel like it feels like a weird way to value something. But I mean, I guess movies have standard costs, and other entertainment has standard costs, and so it's I just blew myself up. That's great. And so there's sort of, we're kind of stuck with that. I think people sort of, because with movies it's admission. It's like you're paying pretty much to get into the theater, and so there's this sense that that's the same cost no matter what kind of movie it is. And actually, I think that one of the reasons 3D has become so popular, it's not because people actually like it that much, it's because it's a reason why movies can justify, like really expensive movies can justify charging a little bit more. Because people get a sense that, the admission is different. I'm coming in not just with admission, but with a piece of equipment that I'm borrowing. And there's like a room that is set up a little differently, and so they can charge more for that experience. Whereas, it's like they couldn't do that. Like, even though, like, say, a Transformers movie cost a lot more to make than some, cool indie movie, they don't charge more for Transformers tickets, and the indie movie can't really reduce its price in order to, try to attract more of an audience. So I don't know. I was really glad when indie games started being able to charge less. Have people sort of have either publishers accept that idea or publishers just sort of get out of the way so that independent developers could charge whatever they wanted. And you ended up with and actually that kind of came about with digital distribution, because back when games almost exclusively had to be marketed on store shelves, you have, basically a store only wants to sell a $60 game on their shelf. If they can avoid wasting shelf space on things that aren't going to make them as much money, then they will avoid that. And so things like places like Steam, where store shelf space isn't really the issue, they could allow games to sort of exist on different tiers. So, and anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about, but like things like sometimes I even think that way too. Like with Invisible Ink, I felt almost obligated to buy it on PS4 just because I got so many hours of entertainment out of that game, despite only paying what is it? Like, is it $20? $15? I'm not even sure what it is. But it's less than 30, and I got so much more entertainment out of it than I got even out of most of the $60 games that I bought. It just felt like I owe these guys some money for all of the entertainment they give me, but am I paying them extra because of the amount of time that I spent on their game, or am I paying them extra because of the quality of their game? That the reason I spent so much time on it was because I loved it. That's the thing. It's like most games, you try to make them replayable. You try to make it so that the player. So it's not like, oh, this is a 5-hour game and that's how much entertainment you get. You try to construct games so that the better your game is, the more people play it. Those two should be kind of linked, right? So if if I make a game that's kind of okay, maybe you play it for 6 hours. But if I make a game that's amazing, you play that same amount of content for 400 hours. And then how do you price that? I mean, it feels like, the pricing at that point really ought to be about something besides sheer amount of content. Something like Nuclear Throne. Nuclear Throne has very little content compared to a lot of games. I mean, it's a content engine. It's got a system for generating new top-down shooter arcade experiences. It's different every time, and so I feel like there's never a time when I have played out Nuclear Throne. That's why it's sort of my official backup game whenever I don't have anything else to play on my channel. It's just I could play this game forever. So, and how much did I pay for this? I don't even remember, but it wasn't very much compared to AAA games, and I've probably logged more hours of this game than most AAA games that I play. But it was simpler to make too. It's just this complicated set of value judgments that all sort of come together when deciding how much something ought to cost. But we definitely think about it. I mean, we think about it partly just because the producer thinks, the publisher thinks about it. Sometimes when we're talking to the publisher, and I'm not just talking about our current publisher, just whatever publisher, they'll say things like, well, we're charging $60 for this, or we're charging $20 for this. So what? So what does that mean? What does that? What do we have to provide in order to be competitive with other $60 games? And sometimes that can just be games can be such apples and oranges with each other sometimes. I mean, is it fair? I mean, like Grand Theft Auto cost $60. They spent $500 million making Grand Theft Auto, and they made back over $1 billion. So and that's the thing, they knew they were going to make back over $1 billion, so they can invest that much money. They knew they were going to sell such numbers that they could afford to invest up front, just tons and tons of cash in it. But, State of Decay sold $5 million, which is still, that's pretty good. Especially for a weird little game like State of Decay, selling $5 million is amazing. But it's not Grand Theft Auto numbers, and so we could not possibly justify investing, $500 million in making, the next State of Decay. That would just be ridiculous. And so, what was it like? So let's imagine, and this is just for the sake, we have not figured out what we're going to charge for State of Decay 2. But let's imagine we decided it was going to be a $60 product. Does that mean that we have to match, feature for feature, hour for hour, everything that's in the box for Grand Theft Auto? That seems like that would be kind of weird, right? If we had to, if we know we're not going to make $1 billion, but we still have to match Grand Theft Auto because it costs $60 and our game costs $60, or if we don't match them, then we have to charge less. You see how this is complicated, right? Because on one side, you understand where people are coming from when they, want to compare games with each other and compare, prices to each other. But I mean, if we tried to follow the Grand Theft Auto rule, that means that only Rockstar and a couple of other big, big game makers could ever really make games. I mean, a lot of the economics of making a game is sort of built on the idea that you can invest a certain amount in it and then get $60 per box, back. And if suddenly you change that, where it's where the only way you could charge $60 is if you did things that only a handful of studios can actually do. Well, that just means that not only do you only get a few games of that tier each, every 5 years, but it also means that it'll just change everything. Like if we can only charge $20 for any game that we make because we can't match, Rockstar, well, that means that we also can't invest as much up front. So it's sort of it'll kind of ratchet down the entire thing. It's like every game will kind of get worse because of that. So if everybody has to be compared to the very upper crust of investment. I'm almost dead. I'm sorry that I'm not reading what you're saying, Liko, but I can't look away from the screen. Oh, and yeah, it looks like Silent Wolf has joined us too. I didn't actually even see who had joined the chat because I was so absorbed with what I was doing here. Oh crap! That works. Ah! Oh, whoa! Flame shotgun. Yes. Holy crap, what the? Ah! There's procedural generation for you. It's like, what? Alright, catch up a little bit. LeetCode, he asks, does the publisher set playtime and dev time requirements? Sometimes. It's usually kind of a hazy negotiation. As you're working on the game, you're constantly trying to estimate how much content you think you're creating. But it's always kind of muddy until you've really got the game nailed down. So you'll try to make estimates to the publisher, you know, that your game will be 10 hours, it'll be 20 hours, it'll be, you know, 6, but with replayability, it's this long. And you'll make estimates like that, and then the rubber will hit the road, and you'll find out how much you actually have. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. Sometimes it's just like, well, okay, that affects future negotiations that we made less or we made more than we thought we did. But then sometimes, you know, it's like if it really matters, like, oh, we really wanted to make this a 10-hour game, and what we turned out making was 6 hours. How can we beef this up? We'll come up, but hopefully you'll start to firm things up, you know, early enough that you have room to be flexible when that happens. But I mean, a lot of times you don't end up, you know, adding a bunch of extra content once you're already kind of locked down. Usually what happens is you have very hopeful early estimates about how much game time your game's going to involve, and then you're inevitably disappointed, and then the publisher uses that as leverage to get you to do other things they want you to do. It's like, oh, you said it was going to be a 10-hour game and it's an 8-hour game, so what else are you going to do for us? It's sort of the approach. Let's see here. Silent Wolf asks, do you think there will eventually be art assets or automated computer graphics to make indie games have AAA graphics? Well, so I think that, I mean, depends on how you define AAA, right? Because if you define it purely as just number of polygons, stuff like that, then yeah, you know, I mean, that it seems like there could definitely be strategies that you know could come in the future that make it possible for indie studios to generate complex worlds and complex assets without that much you know, effort. But there's a question of artistry, though, you know, and in AAA, I think is less about, you know, there's games that I would consider AAA that don't have like photorealistic graphics, don't have like super high poly graphics, but are still, you know, really well done. Like, I mean, I guess I don't know, like games like Journey, for instance, not AAA, it's, you know, a lower priced indie game, but I would accept as AAA a game that looked like that, if it was large, complex, you know, and you know, artful enough. So really, I mean, AAA, it's such a weird, muddy term to define anyway. But for me, you know, AAA has a lot more to do with the skill and the artistry that goes into the art, and less to do with just sort of the number of polygons and the complexity of it. And you can't really, at least so far, we have not been able to come up with a computer program that even gets close to approaching human artistry. The ability of a human being to sort of put themselves in the shoes of their audience, figure out, like how to get a certain emotional impact out of an image, or a certain, response out of an image, and then creating that image, knowing how to tweak it just right, like and having the skill and then spending the time to do it. That's something that it takes a lot of time and money to get that into a game. And so I don't think we're at a point where we can even really see what the computers that could replace that look like. So we're several generations off from that, if it's even an achievable thing, which it might not be. Let's see here. What have I? I'm trying to read the chat here and catch up with. I think some of the things you guys are saying were responding directly to things that I said like 10 minutes ago that I've forgotten about now. I should check out the Ninja Theory YouTube channel. I know I've watched some of their videos in the past. I know like they're doing things like photogrammetry to try to to be able to create faces and objects that have sort of that kind of unpredictable, realistic detail that makes something feel real that an artist just isn't going to be equipped to create on their own, or at least most artists, it would, if they were to do it, it would take them so much time, it would be just not worth it. We've actually started using photogrammetry around here to create faces for our game, and it's the results are kind of astounding. It kind of just sort of goes outside what you'd even ask an artist to do, and it's pretty interesting. Let's see here. Okay, so sorry that I wasn't keeping up with the chat before. So Silent Wolf says, give an example of AAA that has less than great graphics. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the definition of AAA, right, is sort of like top of your game type stuff, where it's like there's sort of there are very few parts of the game industry. Like, okay, you look at the film industry. They have, usually pretty predictable costs and levels of quality. It's like you don't know if the director or the screenwriter are going to be any good. You don't know if the actors are going to be any good. But you know that the lighting department and the electrical department and they're going to be good. You're probably going to get a pretty decent editor, pretty decent cinematographer, because those jobs have been like known and masterable for decades. How to frame a shot hasn't changed much. Now, there's new tools that cinematographers can use. There's post-process stuff you can do. There's things like, in the 70s, they invented like some motion control cameras so you can do composite shots that were still, beautiful on the, you could sort of control how well those things came together. Like, there's new tools that have happened over the course of decades, but the fundamental, like, how you make this work hasn't changed much. The problem with the game industry is the fact that, each new game is doing some fundamentally new stuff. Even if it's just subtle stuff, just slight differences in a combat system, for instance, bring in new needs and new assumptions and new everything. And so we don't have very many parts of our industry where it's just, this is a known quantity and you can train people and they can become experts in it, and then you can sort of assume that everyone has a certain level of mastery. But I think art is probably the closest. Because it's like you hire a good artist, they know how to make video game art, and they can sort of hit a certain minimum bar, and doing something truly astounding still takes an amazing artist. But there's a certain floor that you can sort of hire to expect artists to hit, whereas with like the best game designers can still design a terrible game, and just you can't just assume that it's going to work out great, especially if you're doing something really new. But with art, it's a little different. So what that means is that AAA games, it's like when you're making a AAA game and you're spending a certain minimum amount of money, you can assume the art is going to be up to a certain level of quality, and you don't have to wonder, well, is the art all going to suck? Because it's not. If you spend money on trained artists, the art will be good enough. And then the question is, are your artists going to be able to push it over to create something truly striking and memorable, like something new art styles, like Mirror's Edge or Journey. Are they going to be able to make something like that? There's a question. Can they make can your animators and your tech artists that are building your animation rigs, can they make your characters feel more real? There's those questions, but those questions, I mean, things like Journey is a great example. Coming up with a really striking art style that sort of captures your imagination and sticks in your memory. Journey didn't have to be a AAA game to do that. Like, it's almost like these are two different questions. Is like, are we going to have AAA level art in terms of just sort of hitting that baseline and that level of complexity, and can we pay enough artists at high enough expertise to be able to hit this bar across the board? That's almost more of a money question. And then there's sort of that art direction question of, can we come up with really amazing, striking visuals? But that one doesn't cost tons of money. That one is all about talent and experience and inspiration. And you can have talent, experience, and inspiration on any team of any size, and it doesn't have to be AAA. So I don't even know where I'm going with this. I just the subject came up, and now I just wanted to talk about it. So. Leak Code asks, why aren't there standard libraries of animations? And I'm betting that Daniel Floyd would be able to answer this a lot better than I could, or any of the animators here. My feeling about it is, though, is that, like, one of the roles of an animation, particularly, I mean, the animations that you give to sort of your background characters, like just sort of soldiers running around and stuff like that. I'm betting those actually are shared a lot between games. I'm betting like Call of Duty probably doesn't necessarily reanimate all of their NPC soldier animations every single time they come up with a new game. They probably pull from their old libraries and get some efficiencies that way. I don't know that for sure, but it seems like it's kind of like, or maybe they just start with an existing animation and then tweak it. But a lot of the times, there's a lot of subtlety to the way different people move. I move differently from my colleagues, and part of creating a character, I think animators put a lot of thought and time into this. Part of creating a character is coming up with the unique way that this character moves, and this can be an extremely subtle thing. Something where it's like you can't pick out exactly, like you can't just describe, oh well, here's how this character moves, just as an audience member to another audience member, but you always recognize Kratos, and you always recognize, what it's like, like part of recognizing Kratos is seeing the way he hunches over and the way that he grimaces and the way that he, it's not just the look of the character, it's also the movement of the character. And so when you're creating a new character, that's a huge part of it, is defining that stuff. So I don't know if there's really, libraries that could replace that. Like if they did, try to work that way, I think you would end up with you wouldn't get what felt like AAA games out of that. You'd get what felt like generic games. You'd feel like, everything would feel like an Arma mod or something like that, where it's like, we've got a bunch of guys and they've all got animations and they run around, but that wouldn't be, that's kind of what DayZ was doing, right? It's like basically taking a library of animations that existed for a different game and then applying them to a new context. So I guess there are indie games that are doing that, but yeah, you'd end up with a lot of genericness. And I think one of the reasons I go to indie games is to get experiences that are unique. And so I don't know if I would find that particularly compelling, to play an indie game that was largely drawn from standard libraries of animations. Let's see here. Is there more risk in AAA, so you got to hedge on new things? Think there will be a cottage industry of indies that feed AAA? Like indie studios push the envelope of the machines and the dev constraints, and then the AAA studios will pick and choose and make the AAA games from their bits. I think you do kind of see a little bit of that. I think you see. I can't think of a great example of it now, but I mean, there are indie games that are tech indie games, where it's not like where the independent developers are not just sort of testing new game design ideas, or they might be doing that too. But they're trying weird tech stuff. like 7 Days to Die, for instance. Using Minecraft-sized voxels to build their world, but then trying to make it look as realistic as possible within that model. And they're trying something weird with that game that I think there are probably AAA developers watching that and who are thinking, oh, maybe that's something that we can do. And it always feels a little bit weird, when somebody when an indie game does something and then a AAA developer goes and puts a lot more money into doing the same thing. But that's kind of how the industry works. You can't copyright this stuff. It's it's ideas, and and it's artistic ideas. Those can't be copyrighted. But that's fine. I'd much rather. Honestly, I would rather have bigger studios steal my ideas and push the industry forward than to just quietly own something and not let anybody else have it. So, let's see here. Yeah, Sparks is right about that. A lot of times indie games will sort of establish that there are markets for things that people didn't know there were markets for, and then they'll develop more for it. Though, I mean, with Minecraft, for instance, you brought up Minecraft as it was an indie game, and then instead of somebody making a new Minecraft that was AAA, a AAA publisher just bought Minecraft and just kept making more Minecraft, kept putting more money into Minecraft. So we're going to see a lot of crazy new stuff happening with Minecraft that an indie studio couldn't have done on its own probably as easily. But we'll see how well they handle it creatively going forward. Spark says, I'm still waiting for AAA games to copy what Undertale did. So I didn't play all the way through Undertale, but I've heard a lot about it from Brian Giammi, who's played a ton of it, and played all the way through it, I think, going for perfect good ending. Thing is, there are AAA games to learn from that stuff. I'm betting, we'll see some of those. The BioShock games, really try to challenge your preconceptions about what it means to be playing a game. And I'm sure, games like Dishonored and, they try to do something with, you making moral question, trying to answer moral questions about, the game that you're playing. So those ideas do sort of percolate outwards, and both of those games that I mentioned, the AAA games that I mentioned, happened before Undertale. So Undertale was different in the very in the specific artistic choices that they made, but the very the broader ideas are things that AAA games get to do sometimes. Problem is it's the AAA games that are kind of on the borderline that get to do it. It's like the big mainstream games, the ones that the publishers are most paranoid about not making enough money with. Those tend to go very broad, take very few risks. Or if they take risks, it'll just be on the story side, where people tend to have more flexibility than on the game design side. They'll tend to go for spectacle over subtlety. But then the games that are just barely outside that range, things like Dishonored and BioShock, where it's like it's big budget, but it's not the tent pole that the publisher is depending on the same way. They'll get to try other stuff. I mean, the game developers who work at those companies, like emotionally and temperamentally, aren't really different from indie game developers. We all want to make the same stuff, and so you'll see them trying to get those kinds of ideas into their big budget games, even though risk-averse publishers make that a little tougher. So Nathium wants to build a Dairy Queen, apparently. I don't know what you meant there. Silent Wolf asks, if I think there are ever roles in game development that are just sort of locked in, like being, like lighting or electrical work in a movie. Like I said, I think there's a certain level of art that hits that, and there's certainly parts of the industry where design has become that, where it's like the sort of the quick turnaround clone market that you see on in the mobile side. I mean, there's definitely there's an art to cloning, I guess, that like you can do that. You can hammer that out pretty well. But in terms of just coming up with brand new games now, we're still. I feel like we're just still very new. I mean, this industry has been around as an industry for what, like 35, 40 years? I mean, there were video games in the 60s and the 70s, but not very many. I mean, this became serious more in the 80s, 90s, the past decade. 30. I'm doing this for like 35 to 40 years, and when the movie industry had been around for 35 years, it was the 1930s. And they were still barely figuring things. I mean, when did Citizen Kane come out? When was The Great Train Robbery? When was like so a lot of these milestone movies were only coming out around that time. So our industry is still very new, and we're still figuring out tons and tons of things that we just don't know yet. So yeah, I'm really not sure when. There probably is going to be a point where what is it called? Moore's law slows down. Like the hardware we're working on becomes more stable. Where we there aren't where we kind of things settle out. It's not like each generation like, oh, we can do so many more things we couldn't do before, but we have to figure out how. And maybe we'll settle into genres where people sort of know exactly what to expect. But I don't know. It's just there's so much freedom in a game to do surprising new things. It's like I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where we've just completely where like shooters are just shooters and everyone knows how to make one and they're exactly the same, and and it's only the content that's different. It's like people come to games because they want new mechanics, because they want new experiences, and every time you include a new mechanic, you throw everything into chaos. And I mean, it's what we've made a State of Decay game before, and now we're making a new State of Decay game, but we've added just enough that like we have to re-question all of our assumptions, and everything is new, and and it's a whole new challenge. It's not just as simple as just like, oh yeah, pump another one out. We got to rethink everything from the ground up, and it's tough. Yeah, and Sparks points out that things like lighting, in a movie, lighting is one kind of job that works a certain way. With and there's post-processing that can affect it after the fact, but it's so in that case maybe it's two jobs. But in the game, the game industry, there's the artists who are doing the lighting, but there's also the code that's doing the lighting, and like we've had our one of our tech artists has been spending a lot of time lately working on a new lighting system, and like we've got some middleware that we're using, but he has to learn how to use it right to get the right effect we're looking for. And it's not like he can pull on 80 years of expertise in lighting to do it. It's like, no, this software was created 2 years ago or whatever, and so nobody knows how to use it, but he's figuring out how, and and it's just a new problem to solve. And we can do different things with this lighting system than we could if we picked a different lighting system. And they're all different from each other. And yeah, it's just working in a fantastical, invented world like the world of video games. It just means like everything is artificial, and that means everything is infinitely tweakable. And it's challenge. Anyway, I should go because it's after 8, so I should get out of here and go and make a game. And so I'll be back at noon. Foggy is going to be showing me this crazy game called Conquest of Elysium 4. So I'll have to remind him to install it here so that we can actually play it. And so if you're able to come back, I'd love it, and we'll see you then. Bye.